We have a question for today's class, which is not about what we talked about yesterday, but it's an important question. It's a question that a lot of people will ask, and it's a really difficult question to answer. I'm almost afraid to try to answer it, because I don't know if I have a good answer. But I'll read you the question. How do you bring about peace in marital relationship when one spouse is still very lusty, even after so many years of marriage and finished having children, and the other spouse is just totally disgusted with any sex life and doesn't want anything to do with that anymore? And the spouse who is lusty is not willing to even try or work on giving up the desire. Even I guess even means that you beg him. Is it expected that the spouse who has no desire or taste for such things compromise themselves to keep peace, even though they may inside feel very resentful? Very good question. It's not a question that was directly asked to Prabhupada, but there are some ramifications. Maybe I could speak about the ramifications and speak on broader principles that might help answer this question. Now, I've had this question answered by other people, a lot of other people, and maybe not. This question has been asked to many people, and I asked it to them also, but I didn't ask it in this exact context, as it wasn't for people who were older, who were retired. It was for people who are actively married, and younger men not being able to control their sex desire perfectly. And they wanted to have sex outside of procreation. And so the wives wanted advice how to deal with that. And excuse me. The general answer, I can't say that everybody would answer this way, but this was the answers that I got from 4 devotees, was that if it's going to prevent the husband from falling down, in other words, having sex with a prostitute or another woman, married or not married, then the wife should acquiesce and do that as a means of service to her husband, as a means of helping him. Now that sounds kind of liberal, revolutionary, but interestingly, everybody gave the same advice. Maybe everyone was liberal, but they all gave that same advice, that the wife should be, well, in this case, if it's the husband that wants the sex, the wife should give it to him if it will help him, if it will prevent him from creating some kind of disastrous situation, or, in some situations, there's a fear that the husband would leave to marry another woman who would be willing to have sex because it's such a strong need that he has. So, as a general principle, the principle there is the wife should be supportive. The husband should be supportive of the wife supportive of the husband, and therefore willing to do something which may be not normally acceptable, but in the broader range of things it will have ultimate benefit. The question that's being asked now is a little different because the husband isn't young, and it's expected by the time the kids grow up that he should be beginning to wind down. But then again, if the situation is similar, then there's 2 choices. You could say, no, I want to take Vanaprast, and then that might mean that he ends up marrying again because the wife won't satisfy him. Or the wife is willing to satisfy him in a limited way, just so there's some form of compromise. Now, I don't know for sure what was going on in this man's mind, or I don't know the details of the situation. So it's hard to say exactly how to deal with the situation. But certainly at that point in life, one should be toning things down. So if the ultimate goal is to tone things down, that's good. Now, I think, let me go back to the letter, I think she says that he, let's say, one spouse is totally disgusted with the idea of having sex and doesn't want anything to do with that. And the spouse who's lusty is not willing to even try to work or give up the desire. So I would say that's a problem there. Because if the wife has been doing it to satisfy him, even though he doesn't want to do it, and might even be willing to do it restrictively, then he should be willing to restrict himself. And it's going to be hard for her to make compromise and sacrifice if he's not willing to do it. So, ultimately in a situation like this, you have two perspectives. One, you have this dharmic perspective of the dharmic wife who should satisfy the husband. And then you have a higher principle, which is Krishna consciousness. And on the principle of Krishna consciousness, she's not absolutely obligated to satisfy that desire. And she has a right to withdraw if he's demanding it. She also, she has the right to satisfy it if she thinks ultimately that will be the best thing. But at a certain point, if she thinks it's not going to be the best thing, then she has a right to pull off. Especially if the children are grown up and move and out of the house, then that's the time for Vanaprast. And so by pulling out, she'd saying, I want to take Vanaprast. But that's a decision she has to make. If that's actually the best thing for her. And probably that means he would have to remarry. And he may run into the same problem if he's older, marrying a woman who's older, who also is not so interested in sex. Women of that age are not interested in sex. So, there's compromises here. And I'm sure there's some people who would just say that she should not. And at that age, they should both take Vanaprast. And if he's not willing to compromise or control himself, then she should just pull out. That would be a radical view, and I'm sure some would say that. And others would say what I would say, and I interjected there that I feel like he should be willing to compromise. And ideally, the goal would be to work things out in a way that he's able to overcome his sexual desire. Now, the thing is, at that age, if he can't control it, the problem may be something that he needs to look into. That why, at that stage of his life, even ordinary men are not so sexually active. Why he needs to be. What's going on? And maybe there's something else going on that needs to be addressed. I don't know what, but maybe there's another need he has that's not being met and it's not really physical. Sometimes physical needs are there because emotional needs are not being met, and so one feels empty. That's how I tend to approach things. I always tend to approach things as let's work for the ideal, and let's see how to get there. And if we can't get there tomorrow, but let's see how we can get there, and let's see if there's anything that the individual is not understanding, or something the individual can do to change an attitude or behavior, and let's work on that. Because a lot of times problems exist because somebody is lacking information or lacking skills or lacking proper attitudes. So rather than just get into the situation, sometimes we need to look at what we can do to help develop better attitudes and skills. So that's my short answer. I don't, really there's not an absolutely perfect answer for this, because either way it's not ideal. And it's really ultimately a decision that the woman will have to make, because as I said, I think she's justified in going either way, as long as he's willing to work to overcome his particular desire and recognize that at his age, at any age it's bad, but at his age it's especially bad, and that he should be willing to do something and not like Prabhupada said, you don't want to see your wife like a machine for your sense gratification. And so you need to respect the desires of your wife. And a man should not see his position as controller and enjoyer of his wife. Because controller and enjoyer is what got us into the material world. I think I was saying in another class that Gorkashordas Babaji had instructed one householder that you should serve your wife menially. And he saw that was what the person needed to hear and needed to do because he had the wrong consciousness. So if a man enters marriage and thinks, well, according to Shastra it says that the wife should do whatever the husband wants, she should see him as guru and so forth. And so then he acts as a dictator, as the supreme controller and enjoyer of his wife. Supreme controller and enjoyer, that's Krishna, and if we think that way, that's not Krishna conscious. So we're not ordinary people, we're devotees. So a man can't pull out those trump cards. Listen, I'm the man, I'm the enjoyer and controller, because that's not Krishna consciousness. Aside from that, it's not, and men don't understand this, but that's not male consciousness. Krishna is the supreme controller and the supreme enjoyer, but how does he act? Does he act like the supreme enjoyer and controller? Now look at Krishna's leelas, his pastimes. How does he deal with the gopis? How does he deal with Radharani? Sometimes you'll see a picture in Krishna's serving Radharani or touching her feet or some way making up. So he's acting in ways which shows that he's being controlled by Radharani. And he says that he's controlled by his devotees. And he says that he reciprocates with his devotees. So he as the male is taking the role of one who's subservient to the love and affection of his devotees. So he's also showing us that as men, that's how we should be in relation to our wives. If we're actually men, following the example of the Supreme Male Krishna, then the Supreme Male Krishna is fulfilling the desires of Radharani. And so the Supreme Male, or the male mentality in this world means that the man is taking care of the wife, because the man is the stronger, physically stronger, generally, emotionally, mentally. He's more capable by nature of doing difficult things that would be difficult for the woman. And so he's suited for that protection role, that taking care of role. So when we say taking care of, maybe non-devotees don't use the word protection. We use that a lot. Protect women, protect cows, protect the elders, protect children, like that, protect women. But if you don't like the word protection, it's just taking care. So taking care means to make sure they're happy, to fulfill their needs. So that's male. That's the male. And in order to make them happy and fulfill their needs, the male has to be considerate, he has to be kind, he has to be understanding, and so forth. So those are actually male qualities, but most men, and being sensitive to a woman's needs and emotions. Most men don't think those are male qualities, they think they're female qualities, but they're actually male qualities. So I would just say to a man in that situation, if you're actually a man, you should be sensitive to the desires of your wife and at least compromise. And try to work towards a situation in which she'll be happy, because as a husband, that's your duty, to keep her happy. Your duty is not that she's your wife, she's just your object of enjoyment. No, that's material consciousness. And any man who thinks that way, he's just in material consciousness. But a Krishna conscious man will think, no, I'm a servant, and I need to satisfy, my job is to satisfy her needs and desires. It's actually, that's actually how a man controls a woman. If he really wants control, that's how he'll get it. But the devotee shouldn't really want control. And so material consciousness it's very much seeing the woman as an object of his enjoyment. So, you're my wife, you should do this for me because you're my wife, you're the object of my enjoyment. No, she's the object of your service. The female position is really more of the controller, just like we see Radharani, she has complete control over Krishna. Krishna's controlled by love, and she loves Krishna the most, so he's most controlled by her. So the female position is controller, and the male position is to facilitate the desire of the female. But as I said, if the male facilitates the desire of the female, then she becomes submissive. Because it's woman's nature to be submissive. It's natural. She'll become submissive when the husband shows affection and takes care of her. So if he was taking more care of her, if he was showing more affection, it might be easier for her sometimes to compromise to do this to satisfy him. And by satisfying him, he again then becomes more encouraged and inclined to satisfy her. So, everybody, and oftentimes in marriages, the couples want to, they want the spouse to be a certain way. Sometimes they try to force them, and we talked about that in a few classes before. But I'm going to read something here. It seems to kind of contradict what I'm saying, but it's an example from the Shastra. Everybody's still there. You're going to have to, if you want to say anything, say it to me on chat. Like if you can't hear me or it's breaking up or whatever. So, okay, so we first want to establish that when a husband takes care of his wife, that means he's providing what she needs and he's concerned to make her happy. So, if he's doing something that's putting her in anxiety, it's not good, it's not proper. But in this case, let's say it's something that he feels that he deeply needs, he really needs. Then the wife should be thinking, okay, how can I serve and how can I support my husband? But there's a balance there. So the point I was making is that the mood, the mood that can be happening in a situation like this is the man is very demanding, and he's not taking into consideration the needs and desires of the wife, and therefore she's reluctant to fulfill his needs. And probably in this case, as she said, disgusted and really upset about it. So this sets a good example for this principle. So here's a little thing from the Mahabharata, and this is Draupadi. She's speaking to Satyabhama, and Satyabhama was saying, "You're married to 5 very powerful men, but they all seem to be completely submissive to you and controlled by you. What do you do?" And she said, "I've given up all sense of false pride, as well as desires for sense gratification. I control my anger and always secure my husbands, and always serve my husbands with great care and devotion. I restrain my senses so carefully that I do not even allow a glance to betray the slightest bit of emotion." In other words, if she's upset, she won't show it. "I never even think of bathing, eating, or sleeping until my husbands and servants have done so. I am ready to rise up quickly at any hour to personally greet my husbands when they return home. I always endeavor to do that which is agreeable to them, and I discharge my various duties cheerfully and without lethargy. I always serve my superiors, and never speak of them disrespectfully. Most of all, I'm very careful to always wait upon my mother-in-law Kunti with the utmost respect and attention." All you ladies are thinking, "My God, this is amazing. I could never do that." In Indraprastha, I alone kept track of my husband's daily income and expenditure, and thus only knew the totality of their wealth, because I accepted this great burden of responsibility, and was the first to rise in the morning and the last one at night to go to bed. I have won the great respect of my husbands. So she's saying, what's really happening? Well, what Satyabhama said is, how do you have so much control over them? It's controlled through service. And so here are some statements after this. A wife must first consider her husband to be God, after all. It is he alone who can fulfill all her desires for children, clothing, etc. By always, I'm not sure what this word is. Something her husband and promptly serving him, adoring, I think it's adoring, but always adoring her husband and promptly serving him with whatever he requires, a wife makes him feel that she really loves him. When a husband, a maidservant, do something, a wife should do it herself. In other words, if there's another person who could serve the husband, she should not let that person do it, and she should do it. Whatever a man says to his wife in confidence should never be repeated to others. A woman should consider all persons who are hostile toward her husband to be personas non grata. She should never allow herself to be seen enjoying the company of another man, even to the extent of speaking privately with even her own sons. Wow. Culture is different, of course. Also, a good wife should shun the company of other women who are not of very good character. Then Markandeya Rishi said to Yudhisthira, for a woman, the performance of sacrifice and austerity is not as effective as the sincere service that she renders to her husband. So this was the answer to the question, how do you control your husband? And that's the point, that if you serve your husband like this, he becomes submissive. It was like Krishna becomes submissive to Radharani. And if the husband serves the wife in a similar way, through protection, providing what she needs, through listening to her, being very tuned into her, she becomes submissive to him. And then she becomes more sensitive to his needs and more desirous of fulfilling his needs. So in a situation like that, then the scenario that you're talking about could be more easily resolved, because they both want to satisfy one another. They're more willing to satisfy one another because that's all they do. But when that's not how the marriage works, then when you come into a situation like this, it's going to be very difficult to deal with it, I think. So, I'd like to go back to this concept of what a man is. The last class, we talked about feminism, and feminism being one aspect of it, being women that are trying to be more like men and moving out of the home into the workplace and doing a lot of things that traditionally women didn't do, and being more like man in many ways. And so then you have this other problem, which we were basically touching on, is that women are being less and less women now, or they don't know how to be women like they used to. So they're becoming more like men, and the men are more like women, and the men think they're like men when they're actually being like women. So if you say, women meaning the controller Shakti, Radharani controlling Krishna, and then men taking on the role of controller. It's a natural role, they want to do it. But as Vaishnavas, as devotees, really the role is servant, and that's the supreme male position, to fulfill the desire of another. Yeyatam mam prapadnante, that's what Krishna does, he fulfills the desires of his devotees. So that's the male position. So that's what the husband's supposed to do. And then everything's really nice. Now, is that easy to do? Maybe not for everybody. Men have their ego, and then when they act through that ego, they think that's what men do. They dominate, they control. But that's not really what they do. That's not how women won't be happy. They want men to dominate, but they want it to be dominated. The domination is motivated by protection, security, and affection, not dominated for their personal enjoyment. So this is the real, it's a little, I don't know, for some people it's hard because when they get married, they're getting married to enjoy. So they don't really get married to become like the humble servant who fulfills the needs of another person, because we all have our own needs, and if you're single, you're used to fulfilling your own needs. And now once you get in this relationship, really the service or the duty of that relationship is to fulfill the needs of the other person. And that can be hard for some people. And there can be a lot of fighting over the needs of whose needs are not being fulfilled. And so a higher consciousness is always to give preference to the needs of another. Now I know some psychologists would object with that and say, no, you all have to fulfill your needs. Okay, so we can go with that, but each individual within the marriage, as far as possible, should be very focused on the needs of the other person and be willing to sacrifice personal interest to fulfill those needs. And it will endear the spouse, the partner, to that person. And if they both do it, they'll both be very willing and happy to make sacrifices for others. And you can turn that around. You get the opposite, where when the spouses are unwilling to compromise, then when there's a situation where somebody wants something that the other person doesn't want, then it's very hard. It can be very hard to work it out because they're not operated on the paradigm of compromising or beyond compromise, just being concerned that the other one's happy. So, what we're talking about here, if we go from the last class, is we're talking about when you have an ideal man, or when I didn't say ideal, when you have a man who's a man and a woman who's a woman, the chances of having a good marriage are very good because the roles are clear, and when the husband and the wife perform the roles that traditionally they're meant to perform, if they're actually men and women, that generally they'll be happy because the roles are complementary and they're not competitive. But as the man tries to become more like a woman more like a man, then it doesn't work. And there's a lot of frustration. Now, we talked about last week how there's resistance. For women to actually become women and the whole woman's liberation, there's resistance for men to become men. Because man means someone who's controlled, someone who's disciplined. And in a marital relationship, a man has to deal with a lot of, I don't know how we say it, I don't like to say emotional stuff, but just he has to deal with things which he doesn't deal with other men. And some of those things he may not fully understand, and some of those things may not always make sense to him. But if he's a man, he deals with it, and he doesn't get upset with his wife because she's acting like a woman. She's not acting the way other men act. Because sometimes men do that. They get upset because their wives don't act like men. So a disciplined man, a self-controlled man, a man who's really a man, he can deal with it with understanding, with kindness, with patience and tolerance. That's a real man. Because real man means one who's disciplined, one who's sense-controlled. Now, if a man gets very upset because his wife expresses some of her feelings which he doesn't think are appropriate, or he doesn't agree with, or he assesses them as being emotional outbursts, then that's not really being a man, although it comes out externally as strong. He's really, take control. You wear the pants in the family. So he's taking control. He's putting the woman in her place. You're just emotional. You need a man who's grounded. He can, get you through this mess. So that's not a man, and it's not what a woman wants in a man. And it makes it really difficult for a woman to live with a man like that, and then it makes it difficult for the man to live with a woman like that, because he's not going to be happy if she's not happy. And then what likely happens in that scenario is that he says, my wife is like this, there's something wrong with her. And therefore our marriage is problematic. But more often than not, the problem is he's not acting like a man, and that's why she's not happy. Because women don't really want to marry women. They want to marry men. And the men, when they're like women, then it creates this problem. And so it's an important point, because most men don't know that they're like women. They think they're, like strong men. But a lot of that strength is just they're not controlled. So, I am so tired. If you don't ask me some questions, I'm going to fall asleep. I've been going all day for the last 5 days, non-stop. So, maybe ask your questions go to chat on Krishna.com, not Krishna.com, Mayapur TV, then click on Mahatma Das. Because I'm not on Krishna.com, I couldn't get on. And while I'm waiting for your questions, maybe we could review a few things that we talked about last week, which was about the feminist movement, which gave more leeway to women, but in the process created a lot of problems. And I was saying that, I don't know if I told you this, but I was saying that any part of the world, any traditional lifestyle, like village lifestyle, that you don't see this competition amongst the men and the women. You just see that they have roles, and everybody's happy with their roles. Just like in a healthy society, not everybody's on top. Some people are in the middle and some people are bottom. But if it's a healthy society, the person on the bottom is not envious of the person on top. He just understands this. His skill set, his abilities, his intelligence, his knowledge are not the same as the person on the top. And so everybody does their duty and everyone's okay with it. So, for eons and eons, men and women were okay with male and female roles, and all of a sudden, like 50 years ago or something, they weren't okay with it anymore. They felt they were being exploited, taken advantage of. So, Timothy, you can ask your question. And then the women, to defend themselves, started becoming more male because they didn't feel that the men were probably taking care of them, which is a natural response because the men are failing. And so how can you be a perfect wife if the husband's not an ideal husband? So they were taking things in their hands. So that's kind of the history of feminism, where they didn't want to be overly dependent on men. And men were, they tended to sometimes exploit women, so then women had, they felt they had a right to defend themselves, because the men are supposed to defend them and they're not defending them. And that's kind of how it developed. And then we discussed yesterday, but what happened socially is that it created a lot of stress in the families with women working. It also created a lot of problem of cheating going on between men and women, cheating on their spouses because of the members of the opposite sex are working closely together in the workplace. And it created a slew of other problems. So, there were reasons, as I said, that women wanted to do it, but it created so many problems. Okay, if women are meant to be taking care of the house and not trying to be like a man, then devotees think they shouldn't go to college and get an education, to struggle with culture. I don't think you'll find unanimous agreement on this. The reason, I think it's a question of what's important. And what's important for one will be different for another. Going to college and getting an education, as we know, is simply for finding employment and making money. Ideally, if you, and this is not only amongst devotees who say this, there's many people who say this, the ideal place for the woman is not at work, but it's with the children. There's many people say this, not just Prabhupada, not just the Vedas. But, okay, let's go with that argument. Let's say for the sake of argument you accept that you know, in an ideal scenario, if a woman didn't need to work, then the best place for her would be to keep the home nice for the husband and take care of the children, and then the husband will be happy. You know, women get much more stressed out in the workplace than men. They did this research and they found that hormones that are excreted when people are stressed, with the same amount as excreted in a woman's body as a man's body, the woman's tolerance to it is much less. She can't tolerate the stress. When she comes home from work at the office, she's like 4 times more stressed than the husband, who if the husband went through the same level of stressful situations. So a lot of times when I look at this male-female thing, I don't look at it in terms of the woman's not qualified to do these certain jobs. A lot of times they're more qualified. I look at it from, well, if she's there, who's with the kids? And you know, the nanny's with the kids. So the kids grew up with a nanny and the mother never grew up with the kids. And then the kids, they're weird. Or they might be weird. Something's missing in their life. Or the woman's just really stressed out because she's working and having to take care of kids. It's not ideal. So, but aside from that point, a lot of times I think it's the social context of the men and women working together and how that affects their lives, because there's a lot of cheating going on that perhaps wouldn't go on if there wasn't this proximity in the workplace between male and female. That's a thought. Even saying that women are qualified to do all these things, but should they do them? Is it good? And I think up to about 50 years ago, everybody agreed it wasn't so good, or up to 100 years ago, nobody thought it was good. So it's not really a Krishna, you know, I wouldn't see it as a Krishna conscious cultural value. I think it was just a traditional cultural value in the world. So, but now, I think there's a couple of reasons. I can't say every reason why women go to school, but I can tell you what I've observed and people have told me. Parents are concerned that if there's a divorce, or if the husband dies, or girl doesn't get married right away, how will she support herself? So she should have a good education, a good job, good career. That way, or if her husband's abusive, she has a way out and she can take care of herself. So, of course, that's a valid argument. It's Kali Yuga, and one never knows what will happen. If one has a secure environment of a family which she can fall back on, then that wouldn't be a concern. I think another reason women go to school is because they want to, and they're interested in developing a career. They don't just want to be housewives, they want to do something more. And certainly Prabhupada encouraged women to be preachers and do what their brothers were doing. And I know many women who've been to college who have great skills that they're utilizing in Krishna service as editors, as designers, so many things. So they might think, well, I just don't want to make flower garlands. I want to do something more than that. So let me develop some skill. So it could be for service. And I think in many cases it's just the culture. Women just go to college. It's not even so well thought out. You know, it's just like, yeah, well, we're all going to college. It's just what we do. You know what I mean? It's not like really consciously planned out. And, you know, women get careers, and A lot of women get careers, and 3 years later they get married and have kids and give up their careers. And it's just how it is. And then some don't give up their careers. Now, as far as going to college, getting an education, there are some who will be concerned with the environment on campus and not opposed to education, but opposed to the environment. There will be some who are more traditional who will not send their girls for higher education because they just want them to learn how to be good wives, serve their husbands, and take care of their kids. Which I said traditionally for a million years was not a problem until about 50, 60 years ago, or whenever, 80 years ago it became a problem. Women felt oppressed. So, I think it's important, Timothy, that you understand a lot of what Prabhupada gave us are like eternal religious principles which show up in other religious traditions. So, it's not the cultural side only of Krishna consciousness. It's a cultural side of many traditions. Some devotees do think that you shouldn't go to college, and some think you should go to college, and some don't think about it. They don't care one way or the other. It's it's like a practical decision. If you needed to, you go to college, you spend a few more years in college, but you earn much more. Okay, it makes sense. Yeah. Well, and Pallavi says her father wanted to do an MBA just in case she needed to work. And like now, she can't work in America, but if she could, it would be good because she needs to work because her husband just barely keeps it together with his salary. But Pallavi, as you know, is also another reason, because the father wants to get a good husband, and if the girl doesn't have a degree, they're not going to marry her. So she's just going to college to get a degree, and she'll never use it, but it's on there that she's qualified. I was told that. I think that's true. Tony says, I think it's a complicated issue because in Kali Yuga everything is messed up and you have to adapt. Yeah, it is messed up. We say our philosophy is that nothing is bad in and of itself. But, when you want to speak from an absolute platform or a spiritual platform, what's education for? Is to develop culture, become a cultured person. So secular education doesn't really make you a cultured person, at least not in the Krishna conscious sense. And it could make you a degraded person also. So, that's the sense of education that, the Krishna conscious education. And the other education, a lot of times it may be a decision a husband and wife have to make. Maybe the husband needs help, he doesn't want to work so hard. Or maybe, the woman just does not want to be a housewife at home. She wants to have her own career, and that's just how she was raised. Then you're getting more into this thing of the woman being more like a man. And it doesn't always work. So, Carolina says, I like what you say, the goal is to serve each other, helping each other, not just one being controlling the other, like some men and women think. The other should do this and that, yeah. But then if you think, women don't think they should control the marriage, although, they may understand, it's really the man's position, but many women do control the marriage, or they want to control it. And it's really a problem if the man wants to control and the woman wants to control also. So, and this idea of supporting one another, serving one another, all it is ABCs of Krishna consciousness, but somehow or other, people get married, then they drop the ABCs, at least in the marriage. They might keep it. Not necessarily drop it outside the marriage, but drop it inside the marriage. Well, this is marriage, I'm not a servant. So that's not smart, in my opinion. It's very interesting how it happens. Like, the man gets in that role, and then it's like he thinks he's got a license to transcend the philosophy of Krishna consciousness and no longer think of himself as a servant of his wife. But it's not true. So anything else? Because, as I said, without your questions, I'm going to fall asleep, as you can tell from the sound of my voice. I have not had time to rest much in the last week. We've been going. Morning program, parikrama, coming back, then preparing for class, then class, till 7:30, 8. So, if you just try to, you'll always succeed if you try to help other people. Okay.